The wind moaned across the plains like a sorrowful hymn, tugging at the loose boards of the old Rourke barn and stirring the dry grass that grew in stubborn patches along the fence line. Twilight cast long shadows from the cottonwoods, and the last of the day's light curled amber along the worn porch of a modest ranch house. Inside, Evelyn Rourke moved without noise, her hands dusted with flour and her sleeves rolled up to the elbows. She worked with a practiced quiet, the kind born not of peace, but of necessity. There had been no one else since her husband was buried 2 years past. Just the cattle, the fields, and the sharp memory of gunfire. Townfolk had long since stopped visiting. They whispered in the general store, over coffee and stale bread, that the land was cursed. Some said Evelyn talked to ghosts. Others swore they saw a shadow with a rifle pass behind her curtains at night. Evelyn heard them, but she didn't care. Her days started before the sun rose and ended well after it fell. She managed the ranch alone, mending fence, tending livestock, carrying water from the well when the pump jammed. No time for mourning when the land still needed taming. Her late husband, Thomas, had left her this land in a name, and she wasn't about to let either be stolen by the likes of the Clayton brothers. They had ridden through in the spring of '76, a mean group of 5 who treated women like cattle and honest men like kindling. One laugh, one look, and Thomas had stood up to them in town. By nightfall, Evelyn was a widow. The sheriff had shrugged and said there were no witnesses. No proof, just a body and the sound of galloping hooves, he'd muttered, and Evelyn had stared straight through him like he wasn't worth the dirt on her boots. That night, she'd buried Thomas herself, under a dying oak near the north pasture. The next morning, she placed his rifle above the hearth. Now, 2 winters had passed. The town had changed its name for the railroad, but Evelyn Rourke had not changed a damn thing. She still walked with a slight limp from that year's blizzard, still wore the same gray shawl that had belonged to her mother, still trusted no man. Which is why, when she heard the dull thump in the barn just past midnight, she reached for the rifle and lit no lamp. She moved through the dark with careful feet, the barrel of the gun just ahead of her breath. The moonlight broke through a cracked window near the hayloft, painting the barn's interior in silver lines. The horses were calm, no snorting, no kicking. That unsettled her more than noise might have. There was someone here, and the animals didn't see him as threat. She crept toward the stall in the far corner, where the shadows stretched deepest. Then she saw him. A man slumped against a hay bale, coat torn open, chest rising in slow, jagged pulls. Blood stained the front of his shirt, spreading like ink on linen. His hat was missing, and his boots were thick with dust. One hand rested on the floor beside him. In the other, barely touching his fingers, lay a revolver, polished silver, the kind a lawman might carry. Or a killer. Evelyn didn't lower her rifle. He stirred, eyes fluttering open. They were pale, storm-colored, and briefly unfocused. He looked at her, really looked. The shadows didn't seem to faze him, nor the gun. He smiled, just slightly, as if seeing something that surprised him. "You're real," he said, voice rough like gravel and whiskey. "Don't move," she warned steady. "Who are you?" He coughed. The sound was wet. "Name's Ash," he managed, though something in his voice made it feel like a lie or a curse he'd been saddled with. "Why were you in my barn?" "I bled my way here," he said with a dry laugh that turned into a grimace. "Didn't have much choice." Evelyn kept her aim level. "You running from the law?" "No," he said, slow and certain. "I ran from something worse." The way he said it, she almost believed him. Almost. She looked him over, gaunt but not starved, rugged yet not filthy, not a vagrant, not a drunk. His coat was stitched tight with precision. A man used to moving light and fast. A gunfighter, maybe. A hired man. The kind of trouble Evelyn had no space for. She should have turned him out, told him to crawl into the desert, and let the coyotes decide his fate. Instead, she stepped closer and knelt beside him, never setting the rifle down. His skin was clammy. The wound wasn't fresh, but it was deep, possibly infected. She could smell it now, the copper, the rot. "You'll die by morning," she said plainly. He looked at her again, and something behind his eyes flickered. Not fear. Not pleading. Something else. If I do, at least I saw something worth dying for, he whispered. And then, as his head lolled forward and darkness took him again, he murmured 3 words with a strange, haunting clarity. Marry me, widow. She stared at him, breath caught in her throat, not from romance, but from something colder, recognition. Not of him, but of the silence that followed. It wasn't the line that chilled her. It was the way he said it, like he already knew her name. She didn't sleep that night. Left a rifle loaded by the door. Left him in the barn, unconscious, with the fever climbing. By dawn, the sky was ash-colored and dry. Evelyn boiled water, gathered cloth, and stepped back into the barn. Something told her the real storm had just arrived. Ash didn't die. Evelyn had half expected to find a corpse sprawled among the straw by morning, eyes clouded, chest still. But he clung to life with the stubbornness of a half-buried weed, and so she began the work of tending him, not out of charity, but out of a curiosity she could not easily ignore. She boiled water, cleaned the wound, stitched the ragged tear with coarse thread and silent grit. He never cried out, though fever racked his body, and his breath came in harsh whispers, like wind through a broken shutter. She watched him closely those first days, rifle never far from reach. Trust was not given in these parts. It was earned, and only at gunpoint. He drifted in and out of sleep. Sometimes he muttered in dreams, names she didn't recognize, Clem, Red Jonas, and places like Broken Spur and Copper Ridge. Other times he was silent, jaw clenched, face pale beneath a stubble of dark beard. On the 3rd day, he opened his eyes and asked for water. She gave it to him in measured sips. "You stitched me," he said, voice like gravel rubbed between calloused palms. "Didn't want a dead man rotting in my barn," she replied. A smile tugged at his cracked lips. "You always that warm-hearted." "No," she said, setting down the cup. "But I don't waste good linen on corpses, either." He laughed once. It turned into a cough, then silence. By the end of the week, Ash could sit up. His coat lay folded near the door, revolver tucked inside. Evelyn had left it there intentionally. If he meant her harm, he'd have taken it already. But each time he glanced at the weapon, there was something like regret in his eyes. "You got a name, widow?" he asked one morning while peeling an apple with a dull knife. "Evelyn," she said. "Rourke." He looked at her as though the name struck a chord. "I heard of a Rourke once. A rancher who stood up to a gang in Bisbee. Got gunned down for his trouble." "That was Thomas," she said flatly. "My husband." Ash didn't offer condolences. He just nodded and went back to slicing the apple, careful and slow, like the act required reverence. As his strength returned, so did his awareness. He began fixing little things, oiling the barn door hinges, straightening fence posts where they'd sagged, even hauling buckets from the well without being asked. Evelyn never told him to stop. She observed him like she would a strange animal, with caution, but also the acknowledgement that his presence somehow steadied the place. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the plains with gold and blood red, Ash stood on the porch, looking toward the distant ridge. "You've got a quiet world here," he said. "Only way to keep it livable," she answered from behind the screen door. He tilted his head. "Claytons won't let it stay quiet for long." Evelyn stepped outside, arms crossed beneath her shawl. "You know them." "I rode with them once," he admitted. "Years back. Thought we were just chasing cattle and whiskey. Found out too late we were hunting widows and burning farms." "Why'd you leave?" He hesitated. "A little girl, 12 years old, had a dog that wouldn't stop barking when we came down on her father's ranch. They shot the dog. She didn't cry, just stared at us like we were already ghosts." He paused. "I walked away the next day." "You think walking away makes it right?" Evelyn asked, voice cool. "No," he said, "but it's why I ended up bleeding in your barn instead of laughing at a saloon with Grady Clayton." She said nothing for a long time. The silence hung like dust in the last light of day. That night, Evelyn rode into town for supplies. When she returned, she found Ash in the barn, polishing her late husband's old rifle, not with the disrespect of a thief, but with the tenderness of someone restoring a lost relic. He glanced up when she entered, but didn't offer excuse or apology. "Needs oil," he said. "And the sight's off." That was Thomas's rifle. "I know," he said. "And if the Claytons are coming, it shouldn't stay quiet on the wall." Evelyn took the weapon from his hands and ran her fingers along the stock. The notches near the grip were his. Thomas had carved them for every coyote he ever shot. "They've come back," she said. Ash waited. "They hit a ranch west of here. Burned the barn. Left 2 bodies. Folks say they asked if I still lived alone." Ash's jaw set. "Then they're coming for more than cattle." "I figured as much." "You should ride out," he said. "Tonight. You've done your part surviving." Evelyn met his eyes, steady and hard. "I didn't survive to run." Ash nodded once. "Didn't think you would." The next morning, Evelyn found him sharpening knives with a whetstone and loading bullets into the chambers of his Colt. Not a word was exchanged, but in the rhythm of his movements and the grim set of his face, she saw the truth. Ash had come here to die, not from his wound, but for something older, something he'd been carrying long before he staggered into her barn. She didn't ask what it was. Instead, she brought him coffee, set it down beside his work, and sat beside him in the dust, watching the horizon. And together, they waited for the dust trail that would soon rise from the west. The sun fell hard that evening, like a hammer through old glass, splintering the sky into hues of burnt orange and violet. Shadows stretched across the land like long fingers, searching for something to pull under. Evelyn Rourke stood at the edge of her porch, eyes fixed on the western horizon, where the dust rose like smoke. "They're close," Ash said from behind her, voice low. He'd strapped his revolver to his hip, slung Thomas's rifle over his shoulder, and tied a knife inside his boot. His steps no longer faltered. The fever was gone, replaced by something colder, steadier. "How many will there be?" she asked. 4, maybe 5. If Grady's smart, he won't bring all of them, but he'll bring enough. Evelyn nodded. "Then we'll leave 5 bodies in the dirt." Ash gave her a look, half respect, half warning. "They won't shoot from the road. They'll come in slow. Quiet. Like snakes." "Let 'em," she said. "I've set traps." She had. Ash had seen the wire stretched between fence posts, the buried shards of glass at the gate, the hidden spike board beneath a blanket in the barn, and she'd loaded the scattergun with rock salt and buckshot both, cruel enough to stop a man mid-sin. As the light faded, the house dimmed. Evelyn didn't light a single lamp. Let the darkness be theirs tonight. They waited. The hours crept. Somewhere out in the vast silence, a coyote howled, long, mournful, distant. Then a second. Ash leaned against the doorframe, rifle in hand. Evelyn sat beside the hearth, her eyes closed but her breath steady, counting the seconds between hoofbeats she had yet to hear. At midnight, the dogs barked. She didn't own dogs. Ash stiffened, eyes narrowing. "That's them." Evelyn stood, calm as a stone. "Then let's welcome our guests." They didn't come from a front. As Ash had guessed, they slinked in through the backfields, boots muffled by fresh dirt, horses tied off 100 paces out. The moon was high but thin, barely more than a silver sliver, casting just enough light to catch the glint of a revolver or the edge of a shadow that didn't belong. Evelyn moved through the dark like smoke, quiet and with purpose, her scattergun pressed tight to her shoulder. Ash took the barn side, slipping past the water trough where he'd poured broken glass earlier that day. They didn't speak. Words would only slow them now. The first outlaw crept along the chicken coop, crouched low. He never saw the tripwire. Evelyn heard the snap, then the scream, high, sudden, sharp. A bear trap clamp around his shin. He howled and flailed, but the steel teeth held fast. Gunfire erupted, wild and fast. Another man fired into the dark, yelling curses and names. Evelyn dropped to one knee, aimed and fired. The scattergun roared. The shooter staggered backward, blood blooming across his chest like a red flower in spring. Ash moved faster. A third figure rushed the barn, lean, fast, a knife drawn. Ash let him get close, then stepped from the shadows and drove his fist into the man's throat. The outlaw fell gasping, clutching at air that wouldn't come. Ash stepped over him without a glance, and then the night grew quiet again. Too quiet. Grady, Ash muttered, scanning the dark. The leader hadn't shown himself. That wasn't like him. Grady Clayton didn't stay in the background. He liked to watch things bleed. Evelyn knew it too. She turned, shotgun raised, and caught the faintest crunch of gravel behind her. She spun and fired. The blast missed. A shape emerged from the night, tall, wide-shouldered, grinning. Grady Clayton. His pistol was already aimed, cocked, a cruel light in his eyes. "You really think you could live out here like a ghost, Evelyn?" he said, voice oozing venom. "This land ain't yours. Never was." "It was Thomas's," she said through clenched teeth. "Thomas was a fool. Thought grit made him bulletproof. I proved otherwise." Ash appeared then, silent as a whisper. He raised the rifle and leveled it at Grady's back. But Grady had already seen the shadow move. "Try it," he sneered, turning the pistol toward Ash. "You're half dead already, traitor." Ash didn't flinch, then pulled the trigger. Evelyn didn't wait for the standoff. She dropped to a crouch, grabbed the hot barrel of her fallen scattergun with her bare hand, and swung it like a club. The wood struck Grady's wrist, knocking the pistol sideways. A shot rang out into the dark. Missed. Ash fired. Grady stumbled, hand to his chest. Blood soaked through his shirt. He fell to his knees, cursing, choking. Evelyn stepped forward, lifted the shotgun again, and pointed it at his face. He looked up at her, defiant to the end. "You'll never hold this land." "I don't need to," she said coldly. "Just need you to leave it." She pulled the trigger. When the dust settled, only wind moved through the Rourke ranch. 3 bodies lay still. One moaned, caught in the trap, not long for this world. Ash stood breathing hard, knuckles bloodied, rifle smoking. Evelyn didn't speak. She dropped the empty scattergun, wiped her hand on her skirt, and walked inside. Ash followed. Neither said a word that night. The house was silent, save for the soft creak of wood and the distant howl of coyotes, this time answering a call of death, not hunger. But as Ash sat down by the hearth and Evelyn lit the first lamp in days, something passed between them. Not peace. Something older. Something earned.